And that is problematic because kids hate writing. Getting kids to love writing, getting them to enjoy what they're doing, that is invaluable because what happens when our kids have been 5 paragraph essayed to death, what happens is our kids do not write. There are kids out there, and teachers will tell you, I'm not writing. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing the test. I'm not doing it. And they don't. Hi, thank you so much for joining the Falling for Learning podcast. I am TD Flenaugh. We have this podcast to help parents and caregivers with having the resources, strategies, and tools needed to make sure that their children are on track for learning and to stay on track for success. I am TD Flenaugh, and today on this solo episode, we're going to be talking about writing. This is so important and so exciting to me because I am announcing that I have a book being published coming in January 2024, and it is called The Rewrite Method, The Parent's Guide for Getting Middle Schoolers to Fall in Love with Writing. Now, I know it sounds like this is hyperbole, and that's what we'll be discussing today in the lesson that we're going to do, but we have definitely seen our children fall in love with learning before. Depending on the child, it might be them playing football, getting knocked down over and over again, and them getting back up and wanting to try again and to do better. It might be video games where they keep losing, but they know that if they keep trying, they'll get to that next level. That revving, that ready, that fervor to try and fail and get to the next stage of their learning process is us witnessing our child falling in love with learning. So we want to bring that same energy to writing. And I am going to introduce or, reintroduce a poem by Nikki Giovanni that really gives me inspiration and also inspiration to the children that I teach. Um, and it is called Ego Tripping. There may be a reason why. Um, so I will read the poem, and this is how I start my lessons with my students. We're going to be looking at listening for or reading for the use of hyperbole. I've already annotated this text, meaning I've marked up the text. Here I have just noted. I didn't. I did a little underlining, a little bit of the text. And so I really want you to kind of go through the beginning stages of what a writing process would look like in responding to text and helping kids to get right, to get into writing, and to also be borrowing from the masters, right? This beautiful, talented writer, Nikki Giovanni, using her as a mentor to help hook kids into learning and writing and all of that good stuff. So let's get into it. Let me clear my throat. I don't know if you know, but I've been dealing with a cold or whatever it is. I don't know. But here we go. Ego Tripping. There May Be a Reason Why by Nikki Giovanni. I was born in the Congo. I walked to the Fertile Crescent and built the Sphinx. I designed a pyramid so tough that a star that only glows every 100 years falls into the center, giving divine, perfect light. I am bad. I sat on the throne drinking nectar with Allah. I got hot and sent an ice age to Europe to cool my thirst. My oldest daughter is Nefertiti. The tears from my birth pains created the Nile. I am a beautiful woman. I gazed on the forest and burned out the Sahara Desert. With a packet of goat's meat and a change of clothes, I crossed it in 2 hours. I am a gazelle so swift you can't catch me. For a birthday present, when he was 3, I gave my son Hannibal an elephant. He gave me Rome for Mother's Day. My strength flows ever on. My son Noah built Newark and stood proudly at the helm. As we sailed on a soft summer day, I turned myself into myself and was Jesus. Men intone my loving name, all praises, all praises. I am the one who would save. I sowed diamonds in my backyard. My boughs deliver uranium. The filings from my fingernails are semi precious jewels. On a trip north, I caught a cold and blew my nose, giving oil to the Arab world. I am so hip, even my errors are correct. I sailed west to reach east and had to round off the earth as I went. The hair from my head thinned and gold was laid across 3 continents. I am so perfect, so divine, so ethereal, so surreal. I cannot be comprehended except by my permission. I mean, I can fly like a bird in the sky. That's a poem by Nikki Giovanni. Such a dope poem, you know. I feel like to give you a little background knowledge on it, and the same thing that you could do with your students or your child if you're going to be doing this with them is telling them that it was written in 1972. This is when she had visited the continent, Africa, and her son was 3. And I don't know if you caught it, but there was a reference to a 3-year-old son in there. Um, and um, there's different types of figurative language, but the one that's very prominent is hyperbole. Hyperbole is exaggeration. And in this case, she really exaggerates to really pump herself up. And in 1972, the things that are going on in the world with African Americans or African people in the diaspora is that there are some um, forward movements, but there are also some steps backward, right? It is not too long after we lost Dr. King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, several civil rights leaders died not too long before that. This is 1972. So in 1960s was very much a tumultuous time. But there are um, some forward movement, of course, but also some huge setbacks at the same time. And just learning to love yourself and who you are as an African person could be challenging some days. And so, this poem, I feel like, is a way that we hear people that are often oppressed or treated unfairly or in the struggle for equality to really build themselves up and really make themselves feel the worth and the power to remind themselves about who they are. And this poem was introduced to me by an instructional coach that I work with, a content expert in English language arts. Uh, and her name was Sydney. Her name is Sydney. And so, just so brilliant. But people at the time were, bothering her and saying things negative about her. And she did this poem for us because it reminds her, of herself, who she is. And it is something that I give myself a little poem, a little boost when I need it because it's not easy. Sometimes people question, who you are, or your value, or your worth, or whatever, and you have to remind yourself who you are. And she made references about how African people have contributed so much to the world and to society. Just going back to look at some of these, and that's when we go back and read it with kids, help them underline these areas, and talk about the references, right? From the very beginning, I was born in the Congo. I walked to the Fertile Crescent and built the Sphinx. So the Congo, of course, is part of Africa. And then I walked to the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent is both part of Africa and the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, like those areas are, and then Egypt. So that is part of the Fertile Crescent. And so that is, again, a reference to Africa and the African people. I designed the pyramid. Okay, we know the pyramids are in Africa. Uh, so, and then talking about the design skills, the intellect, right? I designed a pyramid so tough that a star that only glows every 100 years falls into the center, giving divine, perfect light. I am bad. So, of course, we could go through different stanzas of this poem and talk about how it references Africa. So there is allusions to Africa and biblical allusions as well, another type of figurative language. And of course, I'm providing a handout here that you can, the link is in the summary of this podcast episode so that you could find it and reference it and use it to try out with your child because these are the types of things to get our kids hooked into learning, loving learning, because we are trying new approaches, we're trying new things that are really going to help them feel like they can see themselves in what we're reading and what we're discussing. And then, of course, I'm starting with the reading, but I'm going to take it to the writing. This is you know, Nikki Giovanni is an excellent writer, right? And of course, we want to use some of her words to help build upon the excellence and the intelligence that your child has. And so, one way to do that is just taking some of the that first stanza and using it as a frame, right? And of course, this is something that teachers use all the time, are sentence frames. They start the sentence and they leave some blanks there for the kids to fill. And so, of course, this is a way of using sentence frames. And some of our children are behind grade level, and sentence frames are an excellent way to help meet them in the middle, a scaffold to help them until they are able to do it by themselves, right? Join us for Well Educated Wednesdays every Wednesday on Instagram Live at Falling for Learning. It is a free parent question and answer session where parents can ask questions, learn about resources, strategies, and tips to make sure their children are on track for learning and stay on track for success. That's every Wednesday on Instagram Live at Falling for Learning. We look forward to seeing you and helping the next generation thrive. So I'm going to start with something that's just autobiographical. I'm not even using hyperbole in the first part. So I was born in blank. I walked to the blank and blank, right? So the original lines again was I was born in the Congo. I walked to the Fertile Crescent and built the Sphinx. So I wrote that frame, and then again, this is referenced this is all given in the handout, but we're going to talk you through it here. I was born in Pomona. I walked to the corner store for promised candy and bought the whiskey that Grandpa Bill requested. So that's a little autobiographical right there. So, can't do that anymore. You're not supposed to be able to, at least. Um, but yeah, so that's a little autobiographical. I did not put any hyperbole in it yet. Okay. But then the other part of that stanza is I designed a pyramid so tough that a star that only glows every 100 years falls into the center, giving divine, perfect light. I am bad. So again, I make the frame. I designed a blank so tough that blank giving divine perfect light. I am bad. Okay. So now I'm going to use some hyperbole in it. Hyperbole. Hyperbole did it. No. Anyway. Uh so here it is. And the way that we could do this, we could present it to our students. We could make it autobiographical, and we could also make it aspirational, right? Aspirational. And So if our student wants to be like a hit writer or something like that, they could write, I designed a book so tough that screenwriters fought over it and tore a page from the center, and it glowed, giving divine perfect light. I am bad. Okay. So you could play around with it. Again, this play with words helps draw our kids in. They could write whatever they want. They've read the poem several times. We went back and forth several times, right? Rather than saying, read it again, read it again. We're doing something with it every time we read it. We're marking it up. We are, mimicking or using this as a mentor text to help us build upon what we are gathering from it. Um, and then again, we could go on and on from that. The other layer of complexity that we want to add, because this is pretty simple. You've only added a couple of words. I was born in Pomona instead of I was born in the Congo. We put Pomona. So that's one word. So again, something I always want to talk about is there's a phenomenon at schools going on right now where we want a lot of teachers are instructed to teach our kids or directed to teach our kids, 5 paragraph essay to teach things just so, right? So there is a lack of creativity, there's a lack of choice, there's a lack of even variety about what to write. Most people, that's what they're going to write. At the end of this unit, we're writing a 5 paragraph essay. At the end of this unit, we're writing a 5 paragraph essay. At the end of this unit, we're writing a 5 paragraph essay. And that is problematic because kids hate writing. And some people will look at this lesson and be like, okay, well, how does this relate to the standards? Because, we got to have the kids. Well, they may not say standards because this is found in the standards. Hyperbole, writing poems, responding to poems, all that kind of stuff is part of the standards. It is. But what the issue is, what people will find is what they'll say is, oh, well, for testing, like when we look at this, in California, we take the Smarter Balance Assessment. So when we take that Smarter Balance Assessment, how many type of questions like this is on the Smarter Balance Assessment, and how does this relate to the writing they need to do on the Smarter Balance Assessment? And they get really intense about it. They get really intense, and I'm like, okay, okay. But let me tell you, getting kids to love writing, getting them to enjoy what they're doing, that is invaluable. Because what happens when our kids have been 5 paragraph essayed to death, what happens is our kids do not write. There are kids out there, and teachers will tell you, I'm not writing. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing the test. I'm not doing it. And they don't. And what are our repercussions for doing that? We don't have very many for them, unfortunately. I mean, it's sad, right? But obviously, it is a high stakes test for kids because they do use that like for college admissions. They look at that, the type of testing that the type of courses you're going to take, or the courses that you're required to take before you get to the credit bearing, or um, um, the type of courses you take before you get to your actual like major. So it's a real thing. It's high stakes, and of course it's high stakes for schools. Schools get funding and all that kind of stuff, or they get really supervised, observed really heavily, or really people come down on them hard when they don't make certain gains in testing. So I am addressing a need that a lot of people forget about because they get really frenzied about the test, is the student motivation. And students don't want to write. They don't. What, you gonna grab their hand, make them? Yeah, but you're not going to. So if you sit there and repeatedly give them assessments and assignments that are boring, that are disconnected from them, they will shut down. And there's a significant amount that won't do the writing, that won't do it. So you got to have a balance. And a lot of people hear what I say and think, oh, well, she doesn't care about testing. It's not that I don't care about testing. I'm not going to elevate testing over instruction. That's what I'm not going to do. And a lot of people do. They may not think about that in their mind, like, okay, testing more important than instruction. They may not say it, but what they do is elevate testing over instruction. And that is a problem. And our kids are tired of it. And I just, for myself, coming into environments sometimes, try to fit into the environments as best as I can. Um, and then sometimes I don't listen to what I know to be true and do what I know to be true. And obviously, I'm not successful. And I have to go back to who I am and what I know to be true and be true to that. And it's something that we have to constantly remind ourselves of because it's easy. It's easy to just kind of conform where everybody here does it like this and let's try to get along with that. But when we just know to our core it's not work and it's not going to work anyway. It's not what I do and it's not what I believe in and it's not going to work and my students don't respond to it. And I'm not responding to it well. Not like I'm delivering it wonderfully, something I don't believe in doing. So it's something that we really have to think about and really be about our business. Standing on business. That's what they're saying. And the young folks. Anyway. Anywho, um, so again, I have made this book, the following, I have made this book called The Rewrite Method, The Parent's Guide for Getting Middle Schoolers to Fall in Love with Writing. I created it for parents because parents, you're the first teachers and the continuous teachers. I'm going to say it over and over again. And you're teaching even when you don't want to be teaching, right? Even if you feel like you haven't been teaching them anything, you are teaching them something. If it's not to like writing, you might be teaching them that. I don't know. Um, but I'm giving it to you parents because you are the ones who need to take the reins. You can try these activities with your kids. I know that I spent most of this time talking about outside things and not actually the lesson, but that's why you gotta get the book. But also because you need to know the reason behind it. And you need to know that kids will respond to things that are fun and engaging and you've seen them. And then you've seen them rise to the challenge that that football coach gives them, or rise to the challenge that, the soccer coach or the baseball coach, whatever it is, fill in the blank. They're rising to occasions all the time, and they could rise to the occasion of writing. And then if we're giving them a choice, I didn't say everyone had to write the same way in response to this poem or a write like poem, right? The mimic or the mentor text poem in the same way. You could do it autobiographical. You could do it with some hyperbole in there. You could make it an aspirational one as one in the future. Um, so you have to think in terms of that and give them a choice. Make it fun, make it funny, right? And embrace that creativity and that freedom and help them actually get into it, right? There's words in here that are challenging. Uranium, it has all these allusions to history, Hannibal. It even talks about our Black Jesus, right? It says I turned myself into myself and was Jesus. Again, with the references to Africa and everything, it's talking about a Black Jesus. That's how I interpret it. And again, this is my interpretation. Me and Lady Giovanni have not spoken, um, but that's my interpretation. And she could come on to the podcast and correct me if I'm wrong. Please correct me. But it is a wonderful poem, and it has so many possibilities that can be opened up to learning and loving to learn for our children. And I really want you to think about how you could use it in poems like this. So, again, it may not be this poem, it could be, parents, again, bring your sauce, bring your self, your natural self, who is what is good to you. So it could be a rap poem that was really dope that you really loved that your child can adapt to themselves. And again, that next level of complexity would be um rewrite the whole poem in the name of a storybook character. So some kind of character, it's like maybe they read a novel. So in the voice of that novel, of that character in the novel, they are adapting all the stanzas, the whole poem there. They need to show hyperbole in the poem. They need to show repetition in the poem. They need to make it rhyme, maybe. I don't know. You decide what those benchmarks, what that criteria is that meets the needs of your child, challenges them, right? And they might just be ready for just adding one word, as for, I was born in one word, Pomona. I walked to the corner store, 2 words. That might be all they're ready for, depending on the level of your child, or your child might be ready to rewrite the whole poem in the voice of another character. They might be ready to write an aspirational poem for themselves in 20 years, looking back on themselves. What would they write, and how would they write this poem, and adapt it for themselves as like a vision poem, right? So there's so many innovations that we can do to this type of lesson and this type of literature that draws in kids. And a lot of those ideas are in the rewrite method and the workbook that goes with it. It'll be out in January 2024. So I'm going to make sure I link it in my bio, in the summary of this podcast, so that you can be able to access it. But you will have access to this lesson right away today. And, I really enjoy, um, getting to share a little bit of piece of the rewrite method to you today. And so this part of the rewrite method specifically is the encourage creativity. So for rewrite, every letter, REWRITE, has a different letter that stands for a different type of element in the rewrite method. And this one is encouraging creativity. And again, it's going to be found in the rewrite workbook and explained you know, in the handout that is linked here to the summary of this. I really enjoyed this time with you today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting the Falling for Learning podcast. Thanks again for supporting the Falling for Learning podcast. New episodes go live every Saturday at 5 p.m. You can watch us on youtube.com at Falling for Learning, or listen on all major podcast platforms such as Apple, Google, Audible, Spotify, and much more. For more resources, visit fallinginlovewithlearning.com. We really appreciate you. Have a wonderful week.